Yeah, so I don't usually do much small engine stuff, but this I had to work on recently, so I'm gonna post it. Um, I set the timing on this. It's just a Honda 70, pretty basic, as basic as you can get. But this is not necessarily. This is a overhead cam motor. This motor's nice because it's got a window. You take that cap off, and you're gonna spin the crank when this is heads off and get this lined up. It has timing mark, so we go from there, and we're gonna line up the chain with the gear. Has also a mark that goes to the top of the gear. So at the top of the gear, you set this to the top, you set this to T. There's fire and T, F and a T. You set that to T, and you set this, and then what you do with the cam shaft that's going this way is you set that lobes down. So lobes down on this engine aren't going to be this way. They're going to be parallel to the piston. So set that lobes down. Look at the end of the cam with your gear, and you should have bolt holes line up. There's 3 holes on this one. If you have all your bolt holes lined up, you're at TDC. Your piston's also at the top. Because if it's on the wrong stroke, your piston might not necessarily be at the top. It can be, well, I'm sorry. The motor can be 180 out, which is it's not on the right set of strokes. More than likely, if you have it set here, you have your mark here, you have your lobes down, you have your piston at the top, you're most likely it's going to be on the right stroke. What you can do to check that is you can turn your crank and check the piston going up and down. Check which, with this off, check which, because this can be also be used as a window. You're going to have to hold this down, but you have to check which lobe is opening at what time in comparison to when the piston comes to the top of its stroke. So if you have this come to TD at this, the piston at TD, and your valve opening at the right stroke, or your cam turning to, so for the right stroke for 4-cycle engine, right? You can look up the 4-cycle engine, how the strokes go. That's really basic. That's like lawnmower stuff. This is also all the same. It's pretty standard. So if you set it up all like that, you're more than likely it's going to run just fine. You'll have the right timing and everything, and you won't bend your valves. Because most of these engines now, all the newer ones, are non-clearanced. So it will bend the valves if it is on the wrong stroke with most of the ones that I've had to deal with so far. Kind of the neat thing is most small engines work in a very similar way. So like for instance, I did my 660 Raptor. I had to fix a transmission. Obviously I had to reset all my timing. It had an advance on the crank and a couple other little things that changed it from what this is, but the basic concept's pretty much all the same across the board. Understanding that, I found first working on small engines was the most difficult thing to get past, say the biggest hurdle, other than making sure you have compression and fuel and whatnot. So as you can see, the carburetor is removed on this. About that, it needs to be cleaned because it wasn't running on the right circuit. Couple little things that I do is you make sure you take everything off you can possibly take off. I already started to reassemble this, but These emulsion tubes have little jets and little holes in them. All those holes, everything, they gotta be clean. Your main jet here also has to be clean. I blow all these holes, all the ports out with air. I seal where your carb is gonna bolt on the faces with gasket maker, because if you have a vacuum leak, it's not gonna run as well. You got to make sure everything goes back in the right place. For this bike specifically, you're gonna set your air idle by turning it in all the way, and then you're gonna back it out 1.5 turns, and that's a baseline to set your air fuel mixture for your less than half throttle running fuel ratio. That's all on this screw. After that, well, there's also an idle set screw, but that's onto your throttle for your main throttle, twist throttle, the top here. So you set that, you set this after you start it. That's your idle. After that's all set up, that's pretty much all you got to do on these to have it run. As you can see here, I marked the choke because I labeled it because it always seems to be, you don't know really what's going on sometimes, especially if it starts running rough, because it's got a filter. Now, you can't see the butterfly with the filter on it, right? So I labeled it so that there's no question as to what's going on there. One of the other main things I notice a lot of people deal with, especially if they're kind of new, is always make sure your petcock's turned on. Always make sure that it's flowing well and that there's nothing in your fuel line that's going to stop it from flowing. I've had